Well, it is 11:01, so I think we can get started. Yay! Welcome, everyone. This panel is world building and myth making. I'm going to read the description in case some of you, get a rough idea what we're trying to do. Since I wrote the description, hopefully we stay on. So, join two-time world fantasy and Rhysling, is that how you say it? Rhysling, award-winning author. That's a poetry award, which is very cool. C.S.E. Cooney, in a bazaar of tips, tools, and methods to build the world and myths of your very own story in any medium. I'm just auditor. My name's Kyle. I'm on the Guests of Honor Liaison team, and also locally I'm a playwright, sometimes poet and stuff. But I'm just going to mostly let Claire show off and let Claire introduce herself as well.
I will, and also I'd love to get questions from you of things you specifically came here to want to know, so that we can also direct the talk toward that. So I'm Claire. I write and narrate audiobooks under C.S.E. Cooney. The Claire is the C. And I love world building. It's actually like one of my favorite things, and I've built up a tool set, certainly, but I didn't start analyzing it until my husband, who's a game designer, looped me into game design, and we built a TTRPG that has a whole section, because it's collaborative and GM-less, on world building that everybody does together. So to sort of analyze what makes enough of a world to make it feel very rich in game instantly. And so I can talk about that too, because it's separate but not entirely separate from what goes into fiction. They're both tools in the same tool set. So does anyone come here? Go for it.
Can you give us the name of that TRPG?
Yeah, it's called Negocios Infernales. And right now, Carlos is running a game from 11 to 3 down in the RPG room, Infernal Bargains, Negocios Infernales. It is basically a world very much like ours in a time very much like our Spanish Inquisition. And the queen is about to sign religious persecution into law when aliens come and they're like, "Stop, humans! Not again! We'll give you phenomenal cosmic powers if you'll just stop killing each other." And the queen mistakes their dealy boppers for devil horns. And she's like, "So you're saying if we sign away our souls too, you'll give us phenomenal cosmic powers?" And the aliens are like, "Close enough. We'll work within your metaphor." So you play in the game a wizard who thinks they've bargained their soul away to a devil for these weird powers, when really all the aliens want is for you to join the cosmic consciousness. There's like some divine irony going on in it. So super fun. It kickstarted for double the amount we asked for. The day it was about to ship, the tariffs went up 300%, but that is all. They're now on the water. They are heading across the ocean. They'll be on our shores any day, and pre-orders are up at Outland Entertainment. Negocios Infernales, it's super fun, and if you want to head over to the RPG game and just like peer over Carlos's shoulder to see what the setup is, then he'd be so happy to see you there.
I believe Outland Entertainment, I looked it up, has some distribution deals with a couple of the big game distributors, so there's a good chance if your local game store has a contract, one of those distributors could even order it in. But I'm sure you could also pre-order it on the Outland Entertainment website directly as well. So.
Yeah. So
it's a pretty game. It has art. He's a tattoo artist that a lot of.
There's a Chicago tattoo artist who's a really good friend of mine named Rebecca Houston, and she is a horseback rider. She broke her left arm horseback riding right about when we were in a developmental stage of the game. And as any game designer will tell you, because they told me, you never do art first, ever. And because it's expensive and the game will change. But in this case, she was like, you have to have two hands to tattoo, but her non-dominant hand was not broken. And we were like, she's got a mortgage, we've got a game. Let's see if we can collaborate. And Carlos had always loved her Inktober drawings, which are very simple, ink. And so we did for there's 7 suits in the deck of cards. And so each suit has like one color, but everything else is black and white. So there's cool pops. And that's a deep part of the world building, but I can get into that later.
Okay, so, thank you for your question. I'm going to get a couple prompts, and then this will be a question, take a lot of questions, even more so than some other panels. But
sure.
So I'll say, as a writer who especially has written lots of fantasy work, fantasy is very much known for its world building, typically.
Love it.
And when you're sitting down to write a story, do you often start with world building, you start with story, or does it really depend on the story you're trying to tell?
it really has been no story. Like every time I write a story, I'm like, cool, that's a tool in the tool belt. The next story is like, I don't have any of those tools to write this story. So occasionally what I'll have is, so sometimes the story starts with, I have this idea, like what if houses were people? And then you have to figure out, okay, well, who's my main character? What kind of world where houses are people? Like, blah, 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 blah. And then you start from that what if. Sometimes I have this really cool idea for a world, like, oh, what if this wasteland, the Bazaar wasteland, had this city and this city and this city? I can kind of see the map in my head and like can populate it with weird monsters, and then I have like, it's an empty world with no story, no characters. And then sometimes I'm like, ooh, that'd be a really great character. This person who was bioengineered when she turns 30, that at every year thereafter, she would age 1 year for every 10, but her bioengineering went wrong, so she'll age 10 years for every one. She knows she's going to die. What does she do with the rest of her life? Where do I put her? Oh, I've got this whole desert world that nobody lives in. You know, that. So it does depend on where my brain is fancying, but it's not consistent.
Follow-up question then I thought of. So when you're writing, do you find more often than not, or is it evenly split, that does world building inform the story, or does the story inform the world building?
Well, so a first draft is all exploratory. You know, like so sometimes you get a call for submissions by an anthology. Right, so you have to write a story that has an element of, it has to have a romance and there has to be a dragon involved in that romance. So you're like, what can I possibly say about dragons and romance that has not been said before? That's the what if. Well, the thing is, I get so into world building, you know, that I'm like, oh, and here's this character, la la la, and then they live, this is their backstory, and this is where they lived, and this is the city, and this is the economy, and but then it's a short story, only supposed to be 4,000 words. I have to cut like 2,000 words of world building and put it away, and then say one line of dialogue between dragon lover and herself that I needed to write all those 2,000 words to know that he could say, hey, I heard you came from the city of saints. How's that, you know? So like, so you do the world building so that you can propel the story and deepen the characters and give them some verisimilitude to move through. And I love to use world building also as set pieces or stylistic choices. So they say about info dumping, they're like, don't info dump. Well, some of us say about info dumping is that all books are info dumps. It's just how interesting can you make the info dump? In what order do you put the info dump? What is a book but an info dump? That's my opinion. So like you could have this really cool set piece, this really awesome castle or this really great desert. And how you structure a story. What if you did a scene that's all dialogue and action and then page break and then one beautiful, almost prose poem of a paragraph about the land, section break. You know, it stands out, it's like a jewel in a setting, and you make it its own piece, but you don't like interrupt dialogue and action sometimes, maybe you do sometimes, to insert that info dump in that place. It's a matter of order of operations.
Okay, great. What's funny is I use prompts and questions and discovering.
I keep answering.
You're informing the next thing. So you talk about you don't want to interrupt action or dialogue necessarily for world building. So I'm going to say when writing a story that is heavy in world building, as genre fiction tends to be very heavy in world
Certainly
building.
Mine is.
Yes, very much so. Are there rules you follow? Because a lot of writing has rules, but the nice thing about, at least my discovery writing, the rules are there to kind of build an expectation, but there's always ways to break the rules in writing. And do you have any, when you're world building at least, do you have any rules you follow? And do you have methods to when you like to break them?
You know how you as a DM were like, I like the rule of cool? Yeah, he likes the rule of cool. He'll let you do anything as long as it's funny or like awesome. And I feel like you can do anything as long as it's funny and awesome, or just awesome. It doesn't even have to be funny. I guess if there's a rule, I'm a big reviser, so I don't have any rules in the first draft except get her done, you know, stay in the seat, make a mess, look at the incoherent vomit, kind of enjoy it for what it is, and then be like, what do I have here, you know? So that is one thing. I have a little bit of a rule. See, I'm idiosyncratic, so my rules will not be your rules, and that shouldn't be. But like, if I'm writing in a period, I'll give myself a set time period in human history. Like, let's say I'll let the technology be anywhere from 1600 to 1800. Because there's magic and because there's things that can stand in for technology, or because some things in this world might have been invented early, I'm gonna give myself that span of years. But I will not use a word that's etymologically more modern than 1700. I've told myself I wouldn't. So there's that. That's one rule I have, but that doesn't have to be your rule. I have another rule that my friend Ellen Kushner argues with me so hard with, and she's also a very awarded and highly thought of fantasy writer, so here's two of our opinions. I won't use a word like Labradorite in a fantasy novel, because Labradorite comes from Labrador, which is a country in this world. That eliminates a lot of my mineral possibilities, a lot of scientific discovery, like technological names of tools and places and science, because they're often named after the scientist or the country. But so I want something like Labradorite, and I want somebody who's reading it to instantly recognize that jewel as something familiar that they'll instantly have a Labradorite association with, but I can't use the word Labradorite, my soul won't let me. Now, Ellen's counter-argument, which is very useful, and a lot of fantasy writers think this way, and I do to a degree, is everything in a fantasy book is in translation. Because as a fantasy world, they don't even speak English, because there's no England, you know? So everything you write is translation, so their word for Labradorite would just be our word Labradorite. I think that's very valid, but I still there's certain things that I can't use, like draconic or stoic, or think, you know, like I have to find something, maybe I can use stoic. But I think, you know, I cheat all the time. So what I call is the banquet, like the cabinet of metaphor. So if this character lives in this country at this time, what would she know? Like on a, like at her level of education and in her time and place, if she's not highly socialized, but she's very well read. And she has a lot of history, but she doesn't have a lot of practical knowledge. I'm talking about Lainey here, for example. She's got a lot of insight into divinity that a lot of people don't have, because she's a sorcerer, which means she's attached to a god. And she's a fast learner, and but she doesn't. She's from a land where. Like, they all have weird names, and that's really cool. I like their names. I wanted her name to be Miscellaneous Immiscible Stones, or Lainey. I wanted her sister to be Sacred Datura Stones, or her niece, and Amanita Muscaria Stones. I named them all exactly names I wanted to name them. And then I had to justify, why are they all named this? Like, okay, justify your existence, Cooney. And so I was like, all right, in this land, they all have surnames that have to do with the wilderness, Stones or Bracken or things like that. And they all have like highfalutin, fancy names, as sort of like a big FU to the man, right? But the land that they came from, Quadi, which is much older, they have a very more fancy, flowery language that I would like kind of research Arabic words and roots and some of our English words that come from Arabic words. And like, so in this land, the day of the week is luck day, right? So I looked up Arabic for luck, and it's something like khaza. It's where our word hazard comes from, hazard and luck. I thought that was so cool. And I didn't use that word, but I used something that sounded and felt like it. So like, so that's part of my world building, is like, where is this land? Where does it come from? How does it react to where it came from? Is this land more conservative? Does this land think in longer syllables? Does this land use rhymes? And if this land used rhymes and these people came from that land and wanted to give them the big middle finger, then they would be terser sentences, shorter, lots of cuss words, sort of like playfully like, yeah, mom, you know, you're so, not you, mom. You're so conservative and fancy and poetic. I'm just gonna be like, you know, you're shit and stuff, you know, or whatever. So that's part of, I guess that's part of some rules for this, how I was thinking of this world was everything in relation to each other, and how people, even two people who speak English, I come from Phoenix and we say shopping cart, but if you come from a different region of the US, you might call it a trolley, you know, and two people who speak English might have a moment of misunderstanding just for the word shopping cart or shopping trolley. And so you can think about that in your world. Like, they could even be from the same general region, but if their parents were from different countries, what just on the sentence structure and how they talk to each other, where might just small tensions, conflicts, or moments of interest or hilarity ensue. You can do a lot of world building in just how you structure your sentences.
And I'm gonna do, so this is something I like doing on panels a lot. Hold questions to the end. I like doing chunks because something will bring up and trying to remember your question from something said 20 minutes ago are hard. So if you have any questions after the first chunk, we're gonna do some questions and I have some more prompts. We'll bounce back and forth. So I saw a question right there in the black cape thing there that's really cool. So go ahead.
Going back to world building of like generating it, how do you make sure you're not like describing a small house and making sure room after room after room? Because I know that's been a writing issue with some like short stories I've read, that they're like describing a small house, and when they enter, it sounds like kind of like a Harry Potter tent where it's just huge in size instead of supposed to be small and dense.
So interesting because...
I'm going to repeat the question.
Oh, sure, go for it.
The people in the audience aren't mic'd up. So the question is, like if you're doing world building in a short story, you describe something that's small on the outside, but then you go into detail and make it very big on the inside. I guess you're like, how do you avoid that? I guess that loses some internal logic, I guess. Is that kind of what you're asking, is how do you potentially avoid that, or how do you work with that? Is that your question? I wasn't sure. How to avoid it. There you go. Thank you.
Well, in a short story, you only have at most 7,500 words. That's all. Anything longer than that's a novelette, officially, according to the C.S.E rules. So, if you want to win awards in the short story category, you've got to keep it under 75. The sweet spot for submission is between 2,000 and 4,000 words. So do you want this story, your story, to be plucked out of the slush that is also now full of AI-generated stories that, with a team of like maybe 3 people reading hundreds of stories a month? One way to avoid unnecessary description is to be like, well, I don't know that describing a house in this great of detail is going to, win me an editor's favor. However, I am a person who loves descriptions. Now, sometimes people love that, sometimes people hate that. It's just the kind of writer I am. And so for example, the book Piranesi, a very short, beautiful, slender book by Susanna Clark, thank you. Collins is the other one, the Hunger Games one, right? Susanna Clark. And, it is slender, so it's not a short story, but it's a very short novel. And the character lives in a house, and the house is a character. The way The Haunting of Hill House is Shirley Jackson is a character. It's as important to the story as the protagonist, and the protagonist's relationship to the house. The house is beautiful, the house is kind, the floor 1 is this, floor 2 is this. He doesn't say it all at once, but you explore the house as he moves through it, and he creates his calendar after the floors of the house and the incidents that occur in the house. So in that case, you need to give that place the weight it deserves for the story. In a short story, if it's a haunted house short story, or if it's a house where something significant happens, if it's a house that's a time traveler house, or if it's a time lord house, it's bigger on the inside. You want it to be bigger on the inside. But I had a friend once tell me, back in college, while I was still learning to control myself, she was like, vermilion, scarlet, ruby, those are all great words, but sometimes red is just red. And I appreciate that. I go back to that sometimes with cut out all my adjectives. Sometimes red is just red, and that's something I do tell myself to help control myself. But the other part of me is Bill Bryson wrote a whole book on household objects and things we take for granted that have provenance that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years and have gone through like licensing and have gone through patents and have gone through a bloody history, and it's all a toaster, And sometimes for me, that you can do a deep dive into an object as long as the object is important to your story and explore it. Or maybe the character has these moments where they zone in and they hyper focus on something, and then you want to, in order to get into that character's mind, zone in on the object of their focus. that's of significance. So, but if you only have 2,000 to 4,000 words to do it, you've got to choose your moments to do that. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just saying choose your moments.
We got one right here in the front, and then red shirt in the back, and then blue circle. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3. Go ahead.
So in world building, pretty much everything is connected together with like various threads and all that. Where do you usually find yourself like starting? Do you start with, say, like what the religion of this world is, or what the political atmosphere is, even though all those things play into each other very intricately? And do you ever find yourself starting at one location, building through the world, and then realizing that that starting point actually has changed in your mind, and go back and change that starting location?
Because I'm a big...
Did everyone catch
sorry.
that question?
Go for it.
So basically, in world building, the summary question is everything's connected, but you usually start with one thing. There's a religion, a house, Claire brought up earlier, and as you build the world, other things does your starting point ever change as a result of the world building? Is that good? Cool.
So a thing to remember in a story is you only need to tell the readers what they need to know, and they only need to know what the character knows or needs to know in that moment. Because none of us well, maybe some of us do, wake up and think, global situation, political situation, what are my religious beliefs? Where do I live? Where did that house come from? You know, like, what am I gonna wear today? Where was cloth made? What's the history of cloth? You know, so when you wake up and the first thought is, I need coffee or tea, but you're not necessarily thinking of where did the coffee trade come from, but you have to think about, in this world, was there colonialism? Is this a land where coffee grows? You know, you have to, like, because maybe they don't have coffee, and then you can't automatically assume their first thought is coffee the way yours might be. So it's really like, say, focus in on your character, and as they move through the world, what they see and what they notice is the world building you put in. You will always know more than what you write. And sometimes different writers do different things. Sometimes writers have whole world building documents, maps, notes, bullet points, descriptions of the characters that they refer to, like their kind of Bible, and then they have their story. And I tend to write a draft and then be like, half of that, 20,000 words, goodbye, but I'll put it in a notes draft, and if I need any of that information, I'll go back and refer to it. But it's a lot messier than some people who have like very organized world building notes.
Okay.
Yeah, the red shirt in the back, or reddish shirt.
Mine's kind of a follow-up on it. Do you ever think of like creation stories to explain cultural differences in your new worlds? And do you keep track of it in any way?
I feel like, for me, I start with characters, and then like, as I get to know the characters and they meet other characters, then yeah, I mean, that's a really great way to explore cultural differences, because, okay, I'll say, in St. Death, you've got Lainey, who's from Lyriat, a very specific culture. She meets Duantri, who's from Quadib, a different culture. Duantri hates the language of Lyriat. She thinks it's ugly, so she only ever, when she's in a bad mood, she speaks Lyrian. She thinks it's ugly, so I'll give it my bad mood. And Lainey loves Quadoni. She loves to speak it. She's just really bad at it because it takes counting syllables, it takes internal rhymes, and it's a different language, but she's in love with how beautiful it is. And so, like the poetry of Quadib and the celebration of music, celebration of beautiful things is very different from a like more practical, like punk rock Lyriat. And you know, some people from Lyriat are like longing for the flowers and thorns of Quadib, and Quadib can have kind of a like, these people are unenlightened, you know, like brutish, you know, or they could be like, these people have like are not disguising their language or their emotions. I really like Lyriat, they're blunt, you know, they say what they mean. So there can be a lot of discussion about culture through, again, like this interaction of just two characters who really like each other, and but one may like the other's culture and one may hate the other's culture, and that will create interesting, just like encounters and dialogue, and like, just, you know how sometimes my friend from Ottawa, she loves Ottawa, but anybody from Toronto makes fun of Ottawa all the time. And so she has a very like Toronto. She has this thing against Toronto because generally Toronto hates Ottawa, but she didn't naturally hate Toronto to begin with. She just is tired of being looked down on. So it's like, and that's just two cities that are within driving distance from each other. And it's like, it's such an interesting thing about like, you would think of two cities like Chicago and New York who are a little bit in competition, and Chicago's called the second city. Like, how would you, like, as the second child, how would you grow up like, oh, I'm the second city, thanks, you know? That's something to think about, like the culture of a city, but how it's embodied in your character is important. Like, you could have a Cubs fan, diehard Cubs fan, but that means they'll have a victory once every 100 years. And that says something about a character, you know?
As a fourth generation Cubs fan, I don't know what you're talking about. But there's you had the green circle up there. Well, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, so do you use constraints in world building when starting off? I know, like, in my design process, I often start with constraints on where not to go or what not to worry about.
That's so cool.
So the question was, in case, do you use constraints in your world building of like rules don't go to this place or not? Is that?
I told you a few of my constraints, which is like no words after this certain etymology, no words that come from Earth-based countries or people. So like those are some of my constraints, and they're self-imposed and not everybody agree with them. Oh, Brett, you've talked about constraints with me before. I love constraints. I'm still learning about them, you know, like it's really important in game design specifically to avoid feature creep. I tend to be like, blah, 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 10,000 words, oops. I just did that. and then like my constraint is I am only allowed 90,000 words for this novel this time instead of 210,000 words because my publisher said so. So my constraint therefore becomes, I really love you, world, but you don't belong here. And then I get sad, but resigned. But constraints are like a fun way to give yourself prompts. It's like if I want a world wherein there is no night, and I want a world wherein you get water from mushrooms, and you know, like, and once you like have your 3 constraints or whatever, then the language is constrained to, if the world has no night, then you don't have words for darkness anymore. If you only have water from mushrooms, then you're gonna have a lot of like mushroom-based metaphors. And then now you have to learn more about mushrooms, and then the world of mushrooms has so many cool new words in them, and you can base slang on them. You can have mushroom-based clothing, mushroom-based housing construction material, and that, you know, giving yourself constraints actually explodes the possibility of world building. It's pretty cool.
We got the orange X, we'll go to the pink asterisk, and then red lanyard.
When you like the overwrite, how do you like kill your darlings? Like, how do you know what you need to edit out, even if you like all the words are written?
I just love them. They are my darlings. I don't kill them, I just put them in a closet and spank them. I don't know.
The question was, how do you kill your darlings when you do the training?
We don't kill our darlings, we love them.
For say a word count.
We give them cake.
Yeah.
And we promise them they'll be in another story sometime. We thank them for their place in the drafting process. I hate the phrase "kill your darlings" because I think they're always useful. They're not dead. They're just in the garden. There's the plotter and pantser, and then there's planters, and that's sort of like you plant the seeds. You know what the end result will probably be, but you don't know all the cool growing process in the middle. But you need humus. Yeah, humus for your garden. You need to like have a lot of composting material, and that's how I think of it. Composting dead bodies.
What's in your garden?
I think I just answered that before you asked.
And I'll relate. This isn't necessarily but I'm a playwright, and I did basically an autobiographical show about my life that I toured around the country the last couple of years about growing up an evangelical kid and everything. I had a whole section about the children's shows, the evangelical Christian shows. I was allowed to watch, so they weren't worldly, but I had to cut it for time because fringe shows are only an hour length, and it didn't get to the narrative where I did it. So I had to take this section that I beautifully wrote and I loved, and I had to, my director and I go, this section needs to go no matter how beautiful it is.
Then you made a whole other show.
And now it is evolved, and it will be at the Twin Cities Horror Fest this year as a fictional adaptation of that, a full another 1 hour length play. So
do not despair. They are seeds for the next story.
If you're like me, I use Google Drive. I have my folder of going future plays, rather than put them away away in the closet so they can evolve and come out of,
Feed them cake.
put them in the storage so they can evolve as a new creature. So
Storage with growth
yeah.
medium.
So it is very, like, they're not killed, they're dormant, waiting to evolve into something new.
Yeah, or if you like the kill metaphor, just do it gleefully as possible.
Yeah.
So I just wrote a short story for a call for submissions just for fun. The character had a very fun first-person voice, so she's very chatty, right? So she's just like, blah, 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 blah. She's telling me all kinds of things, and I love everything she tells me. And then she goes on this whole paragraph about two people that she knew that she really liked, and I really like them. I'm like, that just makes this character more likable. I really like those. Maybe I can explore this. No, they're just going to be a whole other story with these two likable characters. And because as much as I'd like to keep it in her voice and make that secret connection between a potential other story, I don't have time for it. And that's kind of sad. If I ever did an expanded collection of like shorter work that all took place in this world, I would definitely seed sentences or paragraphs like that throughout so that when you read the next one, you'd be like, oh, these are the people they were talking about in the last one. But if it's one standalone, one-off anthology, you can't guarantee that anybody else is going to read the next story or the next story. But I do a lot of secret Easter eggs like that anyway, when I don't care about cutting for time or word count limit.
So we got the orange asterisk right over there. Go ahead.
Yeah, when you're working on a project that follows a place over a long period of time, what tools do you use to like make sure everything is in order and makes sense?
Oh, yeah.
When you're syncing up, the books cover a lot of time, so it's...
Yeah, and the thing is, because I write a bunch of what I call them jokes, but it's more like, oh, I built this really cool world in one of the stories in Bone Swans. I could use that as the backstory of 400 years before the stories in Darkbreakers. So then, and eventually, if I do that enough, which I have done, every story connects to every novel. It's just not always on the same continent or in the same timeline. So that's when, and I'm like, nobody will ever notice. And then the readers are like, hi, what happened how long ago between this and this event? And I'm like, oh no, now I need to write a timeline, So I do, it's like, first I have fun and just keep myself entertained. Second, I am more responsible and then start organizing. And third, I start doing with intention. But that is a little bit of a backwards process. And it's just also me learning how to write, in my 20s doing just whatever with no guarantee of ever being published. And then suddenly, now I have a responsibility 20 years later, I started that and I could lean into it or just decide to cut it off there, but it's like, as long as it's still keeping me happy, then all right, I'll keep a Google Doc now. I'll search, a friend of mine said he was setting his 5e campaign in the Saint Death worlds, and he's like, could you help me build a lore book? So I was like, oh boy. So I started a Google Doc, and then a beautiful fan artist, Phoebe Ashcroft, was doing pictures of all the gods of Lyriat. So I was like, Phoebe, you want in on the lore book? And she's like, yes. So so I was like, here are the gods. Here are all the stories they appear, or the ones in which they apotheosized. Here are every piece of text that refers to them, and they're from all of the books. So that's how I've begun to organize myself after these many years. But it starts out as jokes and be like, nobody will notice, but I'm gonna just borrow from that backstory there since I spent so much time writing it.
Cool. Red lanyard right there.
Do you ever find yourself having your characters tell you things about your world that you didn't know before you wrote it?
The question was, do you have your characters sometimes tell you things about your world before you knew it?
I mean, in the 12th draft of this, the final draft for the editor, I was still discovering things that made it so much cooler than any of the drafts before. And if I hadn't had 12 drafts, I would have, thank goodness I would never have known, but I would have mourned not knowing those things, because really drafting is such a discovery. It's like poetry, that idea of what will suffice, what falls away, and then what rises up to be leaner, more efficient, and more beautiful, in its place. It gets better and better and more efficient, but it can also be an infinite process. So at some point you'll be like, this is really good, I stand by the work, it's flawed because I'm human. It will be better if I had another 20 years, So there is a point of decision making or letting it rest. Carlos, my husband, talks about, Oscar Wilde said that when you are erasing a comma in the morning and replacing it at night, that's when you have to stop. That's when your draft is ready to submit. Because we can fiddle indefinitely with the tiniest, minuscule tools of a sentence level to make it just so. But then I'd never finish. So.
Cool. I think in the black jacket blazer with the white shirt, you had one, and then
going back to when you were saying you don't use words that are named after things that are from our world, especially hunters and stuff. Whenever I'm reading a fantasy book and they mention corn, I'm always like, were there indigenous South Americans who bred this technology over time? How do you choose what you let exist from this world without questioning it, and then how do you explain things that are and where do you choose that line? It's it doesn't matter. There's corn in this world. Why do you care that much?
Well, because people, because the act of reading is an act of collaboration with the writer. So people are going to bring their own ideas about corn into it. So you can choose to lean in and say, I'm from Arizona, so I have a specific relationship with corn, and so I will associate corn tortillas and corn products with a certain kind of food and the desert and rich and bloody history. And so if I want to bring that in, I'm going to do it intentionally. But if I use barley, it's going to bring in all of Europe and John Barleycorn and the rise and fall of the Harvest King, and I have to lean into that. Or I have to, you don't have to. Then barley, and there's beer and there's hops, and there's going to be a specific kind of culture to me. Either that, or I make the decision to invent a new grain, or use an ancient grain that doesn't have as many associations with it, except maybe hippies and oh, we're eating ancient grains now, how bougie, but I like ancient grains myself. So, or I'll invent a grain that is similar enough to one of ours that will be oh yeah, that tastes familiar, and then go with that. But it's really how much do I want to distract the reader? How much do I want it to be a part of the world? How much do I want, if this land and I'm using bread flour and I'm using those words, then if I have her friend come over and she's like, here, I brought you cornbread, and she's like, oh my God, I've never had cornbread, or is cornbread common, then I'll have to just note, okay, there is some kind of trade between these 3 countries that I've already invented and maybe one I haven't thought of yet. And so maybe this one, the Southwest, has corn, but maybe there wasn't terrible colonial wars, or maybe there were, if that comes up in the story, I'll think about it then, but if it doesn't matter in that moment, then it's again, sometimes red is just red, sometimes bread is just bread, in this world, bread is never just bread, and so that is something I struggle with and I think about, it's how rich do you want your world to be? It will never be as rich as this one, but I do want it to be rich,
I think the purple mask there, and then we'll get you with the green in the front here.
So especially hard magic systems or systems with very defined mechanics, how you would mythologize a monster? So instead of just being, creature X with abilities Y, how do you turn that into a folklore creature?
I love that question. How do you mythologize a monster instead of just saying that its abilities are X and Y, or it's this big? How do you make it part of that world? I do love a good monster. It's so interesting. So I often start from a numinous place, a place of this is just the thing it is. And then my husband will be like, yes, but what's the system? And then I'll be like, okay, so I have this thing, now I have to systematize it. So then I have to assign it rules and constraints, and then I have to think about what I've done so far, the world building I've made, and how is that? Is it bioengineered by a higher level of creature? Was it breathed into by the breath of a god? What do I have so far? Is it as mysterious to the character as it would be to you and me if a monster appeared? If the character doesn't know where the heck that monster came from, I don't, as a writer, have to justify its existence, because that character is all we're seeing that monster through. So there's you can also let some things go if all you have is the perspective of your character fighting a monster. You can have that moment of, where the heck did that monster come from? Or that moment of, oh man, I've been dreaming about that monster since I was a baby and my mother told me I was cursed, you know, or like, that's my dad, you know? That really, your monster and its systems sort of depend on who's looking at it. Like, it's like a particle or a wave, like light, you know?
We get the green circle, we get the black, or the plaid vest with the red shirt back there.
I'm going to go back a little to our conversation. If you have a word you're wanting to use, and it's, let's use corn. And where in a lot of places, where you are, it's a specific thing. But then in a lot of other places, real world, it's generic grain. How do I know what do I use? What do I use? It's like, do I use the generic and help people specific?
Does your character notice the thing they eat?
Yeah.
Like if your character is like, this bread is so fine, they must have like had a really fine sourdough from that bakery who's had the sourdough starter for 200 years. Like, it's fluffy, and you know, like if the character would notice bread.
Well, that's actually what I mean. It's like, if we called it corn, we know it's one crop. But if I'm over in the UK, they don't use grain as much. They use corn to mean it's the broader definition of grain.
So is your character from that continent or this continent?
I'm talking very specifically about if you're actually physically writing it in our world. And it's in some fantasy world. How do I know which words to use?
Well, I mean, that could also be a discussion with your editor. I'm just thinking, like, I don't think you need to worry about it. I think you use the word that makes the most sense to you. But if a lot of readers come up and ask you, hey, it confused me what grain you were using, then that's maybe when you can think about it, or like make it be as important. Like, how much do you want to endow the word as an important word? Is it central to your story? You know, but you can just use the simplest. My mentor would say, just say the thing as simply as possible. My mentor was Gene Wolfe, who I don't think was known for his simplicity. Maybe that's something he told himself, but he told me, say the thing as simply as possible. And so sometimes that's like the same thing as read as just read. Call it bread until it needs to be really special bread of a very particular grain. That's all. I don't know exactly how else to answer.
Red shirt and vest right back there.
First off, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So my name is Renee, and I write one-shot Dungeons and Dragons adventures
Awesome.
for Dragons, Dungeons and Drinks. So it's a little bit of a tertiary question,
Awesome.
but I really love a good challenge, and one of my favorite episodes involved time looping and playing with time.
Okay.
And I was just kind of curious if you've explored that at all in your world building, and if you have any kind of thoughts about it, because I think it can be really contrived sometimes, and it's just one of those hard, challenging things to write about.
It is such an interesting question. They're asking me about time looping and have I played with time and how do I do it in a non-contrived way. And I haven't played a lot with time. We've talked about time a lot in science fiction fantasy circles. And I think that if I were going to, the first thing I would do would be use a game like Microscope to create a timeline first, like use a different game mechanic to kind of create the specific times in the world, and then like this person here said in the middle, give myself constraints. What is allowed and what's not allowed? Like, is this time loop? If somebody affects something in the past, does it affect the future or not? Like, choose what rules you're following, and then I guess like what else is consistent? Is there something that's true at the beginning of time that's still true at the end of the time, or do the rules change in the era? And if so, is that something that you let your player know, or is that part of the fun of finding out? But I've not really done that before. I enjoy time travel stories, but I've not yet had an idea that interested me enough to get dirty with it, because it's quite a tangle. It makes me think of I've seen Carlos design in Twine, the choose your own kind of adventure, the branched narrative. And when I look at that kind of storytelling, I know some people's brains think like that, but I look at it and I try to start thinking like that, and then my brain goes, and then I suddenly find myself cleaning a closet. So, but I think it sounds like it's almost more like a visual art, the way I conceive of time. So it's sort of like, what does your chart look like? What does your tree look like? But that's a DM thing, so maybe Kyle could answer.
Well, so I wrote, produced, and put on the 2018 Fringe a Choose Your Own Adventure sci-fi, like a children's, like Buck Rogers style, had a theremin player on stage and stuff, but it was geared towards kids, like reading a book, and we would stop, and the audience had a program that was red on one side and white on the other, and so the actor would go, should we take the wormhole or should we take the safe route, you know, around the asteroid field? And then, so the play, and there was, I think through the play we had 6 distinct like branches, and with that it ended up having like 36 different configurations of the play just by having the 6 different choices. Because, you know, choice 1 would end up this path and everything. So I had to plot out on a giant whiteboard, like, if A is chosen, then C, and then C is chosen, then D, and then D, and then Q. And my actors so much loved me in rehearsals for doing this. Some of them still work with me, so I don't think they were as upset as they made it to, but I allowed them to riff on me as whatever. It is a mess. It requires, you have to have basically a map on where you need to go. Like, you need something visual to remind you, and then like have a note, this is page 36 in the script, and go back. So that is it is definitely possible, but it is a lot of like prep work, and then like in the case of theater, doing rehearsals, you find the hiccups and go, oh, this is causing problems in the flow of the play, I have to change this part. So it's one of those, you have to have a great plan, but then all plans fail when actually put in action. Sometimes you have to then do enough rehearsals to find the failures and make it work.
Game designers are so cool.
Yeah.
It's just, you guys are so great. You guys and gals and people and folk and fabulous people. I just think that they're the coolest.
We're gonna do orange, and then I have a prompt based on other things, because it's something I wanted to bring up I think will help people, but we'll do this question, and then there's something I'm gonna prompt Claire, and I think everyone will appreciate the prompt, because I'm excited about myself.
So like, kind of more leaning towards the mythology of monsters stuff, I was wondering, when is it better to just not explain a monster?
When is it better to not explain a monster?
Yeah, just have it be vague and not have backstory, and it's just there and it's scary and you don't like it. Okay,
well, so I think one of the rules of horror is the less you know, then the less you see, and the scarier it is. That's one venue of horror. So what do you want? What feeling do you want your reader to have? Like what, you know, how you structure. It's a like sentence structure too. It's like how quick is it moving on the edge of your periphery on a sentence and a static sentence on a page. Or if you're doing it like you're leaning into like what they call like the gross out, the gore, like how exquisitely detailed do you want to like see this monster like dripping in front of you. That also could be very scary, like the immediate close-up, knowing everything there is visually and sensually, scent-wise, taste-wise to know about this monster, but not knowing why, you know. I think you can think of monsters as, so the scary things in a human is like, my skin is doing something, but I don't know why. I suddenly have this rash. This rash could mean 500 different things. It could just be heat rash, or it could be the beginning of cancer, or I could be inhabited by an alien being. You know, when something mysterious happens and you don't know why, there's immediate fear. So how much fear do you want to instill in your reader? But also, if your character is a monster hunter, then your character's job is to know the stats of that monster, to know what has killed it before, what is likely. So is your character super efficient? Are they knowledgeable? Does that make them cooler as a character to have this great and detailed knowledge of monsters? You know, the way Buffy would go to Giles and he would consult his books and he'd be like, yeah, it's this monster from this age, this comes from Mesopotamia, it's this god. And does that create a bond between two characters? And that's what your story focuses on, is your friends and how cool they are and how they'll help you kill this monster. So it's like, what feeling do you want to give your reader about this monster? What is the monster useful for? What's the point of it?
Cool. So the problem I want to ask is, you brought up with the D&D module plotted something. What are some maybe tools, like either reference books? Like one of my go-to things as a writer, I highly recommend everyone, there's not rules, it gives ideas, E.B. White's Manual of Style. I have literally either loaned out or worn out about 5 copies of it throughout my writing. So that's a tool I routinely have, but it's more of just like consistency in style rather than world building. So but there's some websites and all, like when I plotted my Choose Your Own Adventure, I found a website that allow you to do that and just plug in and everything. So are there any world building tools or anything, either a reference book or a website you use that helps you, maybe, like you said, well, now I have to do a timeline. Do you have like certain ways like they reference to use that, I guess, tools that they could take to help with their own world building when they leave here?
So there's gamic ways to build worlds. One of the favorite gamic things that Carlos and I do is pull cards, like from Dixit or Mysterium, like really evocative, image-heavy cards. Some people use the tarot deck. We have our own set of cards from Negocios Infernalis that we're like, we have to write this short story by next week. Let's pull 3 cards, ask questions about the cards, and then generate a story idea. So if it's a question of generation, there's ways we do. My poet friends and I did what we call Claire Dares for a while, where I want to write a poem. So we'd be like, all right, here's 3 images, random images from the internet. Here's a meme. Here's this, do it in the style of this poem and use these 3 words. Those are constraints again, but constraints actually, again, flower open idea. So that's a generation problem. A reference, not problem, that's a generation idea. A reference idea is really, I have a whole section on mythology. Here's Irish fairies, here's Conjure Women, here's Coyote Makes the World, here's the Golden Bough. There you can have, here's Grimm's fairy tales right next to Andersen's fairy tales. That is one of my 12,000 shelves that are double stacked. And then there's all of the internet. So if I have created a world where there's skin changers, like in St. Death's Herald, they consume the kind of like the soul stuff of an animal, and then they're able to become the shape of that animal, more or less, but they have all the knowledge of that animal, and they have the memories, the specific memories of that animal. Well, then I need to know, if they are then also a coyote and a badger, they would know things coyotes would know. What do coyotes know? Coyote behavior. So in world building, it's a really great opportunity to learn about this world a lot, and then pull from it, and then change it and alter it. There's also so much mythology in this world that is so weird and so rich, which teaches us how to mythologize, that we don't have to steal or pull. We can from other mythologies, because some of them are still active religions, and to me it's more interesting to build your own than to possibly harm somebody's culture. But that your mileage may vary. So I love reading mythology, but I love reading history, and I love reading anthropology to study structures of different kinds of humanity, how they live, how they interact with religion. Their ballads are a great source of myth building. Ballads and fairy tales are these little seeds into culture. And code and warning systems that are just like very weird little ideas that are about this big that make you think like a novel. So those are some of my reference points.
And I think something to pull away to condense that down, because it came in other things, like when you talk about mushrooms and you have mushroom slang and mushroom words, that's going to require research. You should probably give yourself some books from biologists who have studied mushrooms and all, and when I write a play about a certain subject, I'm not an expert on this yet, but thank goodness I have a liberal arts degree and I know how to go to the library and research. I will deep dive and go in, and if you're a student and still have access to JSTOR, please use that, because you can go to an article in JSTOR and then you have the bibliography where you can find lots of other things.
Or sometimes you have a professor who's still a friend, and they'll print you out stuff
absolutely.
for you. And librarians also have access, and your librarian will probably be more than happy to print you out articles from JSTOR.
Yeah, I remember one of my creative writing professors in college who said, you'll write thousands of words of research and read lots of books to research to get the name of one character in a book sometimes that relates to the mushroom. And you just have to be prepared to take this stack of research work, and it ends up being one sentence in your
But it can be
product.
so joyful.
But then now you have all this knowledge of mushrooms in your brain, and that's fun. Like if you're like me and a little bit on the autism spectrum and a nerd, you have something to talk about at a gathering. You're like, would you like to hear about mushrooms? So, you know, so yeah, I think we have time for one more question for sure.
Mostly I just wanted to throw out a thing on that. Also, if it's something that was written by basically any scientist, researcher, etc., you can also contact them. They will often send you the things that they have written because they want people to read them.
It's a great way to build community and like, I don't know, have conversations. But yeah, I feel like with your characters, what's their cabinet of metaphor? And then you find out who the experts are in that particular set of metaphor, whether it's been written, whether it's starting out as a Wikipedia article. At the bottom of Wikipedia, they have their references, and then you can go and read the actual articles they're from. But also, if you just need one detail or one word, you don't have to do 3 days of research for that. You can pinpoint your research, find out that one thing, but keep moving on because, well, I've met a lot of hobbyist writers here, which I love. I love that people are writing or making games just for fun and love, which means you don't have to finish. And I feel like that's actually like a great burden lifted to be like, this is just for love. It's like a ludic joy. And so I want to say there's that. And then what Carlos and I talk about when we would really like to give up and go on to the next shiny thing is, as we're pacing, we look at each other, Cooney, Hernandez, yeah, professionals finish, okay. And then so like that is one of the things that we have to do in order to sell a book or make a deadline, that sort of thing. So a lot of my point of reference is from the finishing a project feeling, which is a great feeling having had written. Having had written is a great feeling. So I would say that research can be really fun, and if that's your joy, lean into it, but also only research which character needs to know in that moment as you're driving forward through your draft is also a useful piece of advice that I should take.
Yeah, I was like, my 3 favorite words. I do it because I'm like, I'm in this festival. The script has to be done by this time because rehearsals start next week, kind of thing. And the director would maybe want to read the script, the play before they have the first rehearsal. My 3 favorite words to write are end of play. And the very satisfying moment. And I usually go and take my dogs for a walk, and if the weather's nice, and enjoy nature and just kind of revel in that moment. So that's also, I think, some great advice.
Take your celebrations. Yeah. Love this world that you lived in that was already built for you.
We're just about the end. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Kyle.
And thank you for the great questions.
Thank you, audience.
A couple of bits of things. I have one copy of all of Claire's books we were able to get on me personally and a Square reader. We have more in storage, so if someone comes and buys them all you want, I just have to go to the Guests of Honor storage room and get them. There are copies of both the St. Death's books in merch as well. And I bet if you buy one up there and find Claire, she will happily sign up for you.
With my scrawl.
Yes. And then if you want more Claire, at 12:30 she is doing a reading up in Wurslinger's Way at Hyatt 4, Great Lakes 1, which will be great. So that's just in about a half hour. And then if you want to hear music, because Claire is a versatile writer that writes lyrics and poems and RPGs and
musicals
and everything. She with Carlos Jaga is doing a filk concert in HarmCon.
He plays the ukulele. He's so cute.
And then one final panel for the day, 5 p.m. Swiss Army Writer, the art of multidisciplinary writing. So Claire is, if you want to get writing tips for someone who has written so many lovely things and published them, today is the day to absorb some of that knowledge and ask the question maybe is burning. So thank you so much. We'll hang out here for a couple minutes if you want to do it, and then I have to get Claire to her next panel. Thank you.
Is that real? I can read that? Yes. Thank you. Thanks for coming so early on a Saturday. Saturday, right?